Welcome back to Learn English Lab. Let me ask you something. Have you ever spent hours studying TOEFL grammar, vocabulary, and strategies, only to struggle when it was finally time to speak? If so, you are not alone. Many students make the same mistake. They study English, but rarely practice speaking it. And TOEFL speaking is not about what you know, it is about how well you can express your ideas in real time. The good news is that you do not need hours of practice every day. In fact, just 10 focused minutes of daily speaking can transform your fluency, confidence, and TOEFL performance. In this episode, I will show you exactly how to make those 10 minutes count.
Yeah, and it's such a widespread frustration, And if you are listening to this right now and just nodding your head, well, we want to validate that feeling immediately.
Oh, absolutely. It's so common.
Right. Today's deep dive is dedicated to completely deconstructing that overwhelming sense of cognitive overload that hits you when you are forced to speak under pressure.
I mean, it really is overload, isn't it?
It is. So we're going to replace that panic with a highly specific, neuroscience-backed 10-minute daily routine, one that completely reshapes how your brain processes a second language.
I am so thrilled we are tackling this today because, well, the speaking section feels like a completely different beast compared to reading or listening.
Oh, without a doubt. It's entirely different.
Right. I mean, with reading, you can pause, you can reread a sentence, maybe just take a breath. But with speaking, the parameters are just, well, they're objectively brutal.
They are very unforgiving.
Yeah. Think about the independent tasks. Task 1, specifically. You get 15 seconds to prepare, 15 seconds. And then you have to speak for 35 seconds.
Barely enough time to even process the prompt, let alone plan.
Exactly. I mean, specifically that. And for the integrated tasks, you get 30 seconds to prep and 60 seconds to speak. It feels like trying to juggle chainsaws while riding a unicycle. Fair.
That's a very vivid way to put it.
You are just waiting for one slip-up to sever a limb. So why does the combination of a simple digital timer and, the knowledge that some invisible rater is evaluating you make even highly fluent speakers totally fall apart?
Well, that unicycle analogy is spot on because it highlights the necessity of balance under extreme threat. To understand why this happens, we have to look at what is actively being asked of you biologically and, cognitively.
That's a lot, right?
It's a perfect storm of cognitive demands. Think about it. When you sit down for a normal conversation with a friend at a coffee shop, the pacing is collaborative.
Right, you take turns.
Yeah, you can pause, you can backtrack, rephrase your thoughts, or your friend might even jump in and finish your sentence for you.
Which takes the pressure off.
Methodically, yes. But during this test, you are in a vacuum. You're asked to read a prompt, comprehend it, formulate an opinion, dredge up relevant vocabulary from your memory banks.
All at the same time.
All while structuring a coherent argument with a clear beginning, middle, and end, and then delivering it with clear articulation.
I mean, doing all of that simultaneously is basically asking the brain to run like 5 separate high-intensity software programs at the exact same time.
That is the mechanism at work. It's intense mental gymnastics. And when you add a ticking clock to that cognitive load, well, your body literally enters a physiological stress response.
Like actual physical stress.
Absolutely. The amygdala, which is the part of your brain responsible for processing fear, it senses that ticking clock as a genuine threat to your survival. So it triggers the release of adrenaline and cortisol.
Wow, so fight or flight literally kicks in over a language test.
Without question. Your body physically reacts to the timer. When you become anxious, your entire speech apparatus changes. Think about what happens when you are scared, right? Your muscles tighten.
Yeah, you tense up.
Right. For speaking, that means your jaw muscles, specifically the masseter muscle, become physically tense. Your vocal cords constrict, which makes your voice sound higher or thinner.
Oh, I've definitely noticed that. My voice gets all squeaky when I'm nervous.
Exactly. And you start speaking much faster than you normally would. It's this instinctual reaction driven by the hope of just cramming everything into the allotted time before the timer catches you.
You just want to outrun it.
Right. And as a result, you start swallowing the ends of your words and your articulation suffers. You rush. And the irony is, the underlying problem usually isn't a lack of vocabulary.
Really? Because that's what everyone blames it on.
I know, but it is not a lack of grammatical knowledge either. The problem is purely structural. It is a biological preparation issue.
It is deeply interesting that you point out the physical symptoms of stress, like the tightened jaw and constricted vocal cords. I think a lot of people just assume they are inherently bad at speaking,
Oh, absolutely. They internalize it as a flaw.
Yeah, when in reality, their nervous system is betraying them. They are fighting their own biology.
Well, let me give you a highly detailed example that illustrates this universally. There's this story of a student named Amir from Iran. Now, by all conventional metrics, Amir's English was fantastic.
Okay, so he was already at a high level.
Very high. He routinely read complex English novels, dense metaphorical literature just for pleasure. He watched American television shows without subtitles and understood all the subtle cultural jokes.
Oh, wow. So comprehension was zero issue for him.
Not at all. In a low-pressure, casual environment, he was highly conversational, fluid, and engaging. But the moment he sat down for his very first practice test, he experienced a total system failure.
Oh, man. Walk me through that failure. What actually happened in the room?
So he looked at the prompt. The 15-second prep timer started. Immediately, his heart rate spiked. He tried to think of this complex, sophisticated argument to impress the imaginary raters, which ate up like 10 seconds.
10 out of 15 seconds just thinking of an idea.
Right. By the time the beep sounded for him to speak, his jaw had tightened. He started his first sentence far too quickly, stumbled over a basic subject-verb agreement, and then he just panicked.
Oh, no. That is a nightmare.
It gets worse. He lost his train of thought completely, lost his place in his own argument twice during a single response, and ended up finishing his answer a full 15 seconds early.
Wait, 15 seconds early?
Yes. He just sat there in agonizing, deafening silence for 15 seconds because his mind was entirely blank.
I can't even imagine how bad that must have felt.
The cortisol had essentially blocked his ability to access his language centers. What happened to Amir is a universal phenomenon. It is not a personal failing.
That's so important for listeners to hear.
It really is. It is not a sign that you are unintelligent or incapable of mastering English. It is simply what happens when the human brain is subjected to an unfamiliar, high-stakes pressure cooker without the right kind of physical conditioning.
That 15 seconds of dead air at the end of Amir's response, I think anyone who has ever taken a timed speaking test just got a cold chill down their spine.
Oh, it's visceral.
It is the worst feeling in the world, just staring at a countdown clock while your brain gives you a 404 error. So if the cure for this anxiety is not just cramming more grammar books or memorizing more vocabulary lists, because clearly Amir had the vocabulary.
Plenty of it.
Right, so we have to look at what actually changes the brain. And that brings us to the core of this deep dive. The 10-minute daily habit. I want to talk about the neuroscience here because we all know the temptation to just block out 4 hours on a Sunday, drink a pot of coffee, and marathon study.
A very common, very flawed approach.
Why does that brute force method fail so spectacularly for speaking?
Well, to understand why marathon sessions fail for spoken language, we must look at how the brain physically acquires and retains new skills. There is a foundational axiom in neuroscience. Neurons that fire together, wire together.
Fire together, wire together. I like that.
Right. Every single time you formulate a thought in English, retrieve a specific vocabulary word, construct a sentence, and physically move your mouth to pronounce it, specific neurons in your brain are firing simultaneously.
So it's an active physical process in the brain.
Absolutely. When you do this repeatedly, day after day, your brain coats those neural pathways in a substance called myelin.
Myelin.
Yes, myelin is essentially biological insulation. The thicker the myelin sheath, the faster and more effortlessly the electrical signals travel. This is the literal biological basis of habit formation and fluency.
I always think of this like walking through a dense, overgrown forest, you know.
Oh, that's a great visual.
Yeah, the first time you walk a new path, it is exhausting. You're pushing branches out of the way, tripping over roots, getting scratched. It takes immense effort. But if you walk that exact same path every single day, you trample the weeds.
Right, the path becomes clearer.
Eventually, it turns into a dirt trail, and then a paved road, and finally a multi-lane highway.
That is a brilliant visualization. Now, apply that forest analogy to the marathon study session. Imagine you spend 4 hours on Sunday aggressively hiking through that forest, hacking away at branches with the machete, carving out broad paths.
You feel incredibly productive, I bet.
You do, but then Monday through Saturday, you do absolutely nothing. You do not speak a single word of English out loud. What happens to the path by the time next Sunday rolls around?
Well, the forest just grows back. The weeds take over again.
Accurately stated. In neuroscience, this process is called pruning. The human brain is an incredibly efficient, energy-conserving organ. It requires a lot of calories to maintain those neural pathways.
So it just deletes what it thinks you aren't using?
Precisely, or rather specifically that. If it notices that certain connections, like the ones required to speak English, are not being used frequently, it assumes they are not critical for your daily survival, so it begins to dismantle them to save energy.
Wow.
If you only practice once a week, your brain is actively pruning the English connections you built the previous Sunday. You're taking 2 steps forward on the weekend and a step and a half back during the week.
It is an incredibly frustrating cycle.
It really is. But when you practice for just 10 minutes every single day, you are constantly sending a signal to your brain that these pathways are essential.
It essentially forces the brain to keep the highway paved. This is the concept of spaced repetition, right?
Yes, exactly that principle.
We talk about that a lot with flashcards or memorizing dates for a history test, but applying it to physical speech adds a whole new layer of complexity.
Spaced repetition definitively cements language into long-term memory. And you hit on a vital word there, physical. Speaking is a physical, muscular skill, much like playing the piano or shooting a basketball.
So it requires muscle memory.
Yes! Think about the specific phonemes in the English language that might not exist in your native tongue. The th sound requires you to place your tongue between your teeth and push air out in a very specific way.
Which feels super unnatural if you've never had to do it.
Completely unnatural. Differentiating a short I from a long E, or distinctly forming a V by resting your top teeth on your bottom lip versus a W, which requires rounded lips. Your tongue, your lips, your vocal cords, and your jaw have to learn entirely new muscular choreographies.
And you cannot train a muscle by doing a 4-hour workout once a week and then sitting on the couch for 6 days. You will just be incredibly sore and make zero progress.
Right, you train it through daily, consistent, manageable physical repetition.
That is the fundamental truth of language acquisition. Okay, I am going to push back on this a little bit, though,
Thank you.
because everything you are saying makes perfect logical sense on paper. But practically speaking, when you sit down to do those 10 minutes, especially in the beginning, it feels terrible.
Oh, it can be deeply uncomfortable.
Yeah, you feel rusty, your tongue trips over itself, you forget basic words, and you walk away feeling deeply demoralized. If I am bombing my 10-minute sessions every day for a week, my dopamine isn't spiking, my cortisol is.
I see where you're going with this.
Isn't a certain baseline of confidence required before you can successfully engage in this practice? How long does a student have to endure feeling inadequate before that confidence actually kicks in?
That is a highly perceptive challenge, and it addresses perhaps the most damaging misconception in language learning.
Oh, really?
Yes, the belief that you need confidence to start is a trap. Confidence is never a prerequisite. It is solely the result of accumulated small wins, even if those wins are buried under a pile of mistakes.
Let's define that. What constitutes a small win when you feel like you are failing?
A small win is simply showing up and initiating the 10 minutes. That is a victory of discipline. A small win is successfully retrieving one difficult word that you couldn't remember yesterday.
Just one word counts as a win.
Absolutely. It is completing a full sentence, even if the grammar was flawed. When you do this daily, despite the discomfort, your brain receives a tiny hit of dopamine, a neurochemical signal that says, we faced a difficult task and we survived.
I love that.
Over weeks, those microscopic moments of resilience accumulate into genuine, unshakable confidence.
Because the threshold for panic gets higher.
Yes. Conversely, the student who only practices once a week is constantly reinforcing feelings of inadequacy. Because there is such a long, silent gap between their Sunday sessions, they always feel rusty.
They never get past that awkward phase. Never. They always stumble. Therefore, their brain permanently associates the act of practicing English with feelings of failure, frustration, and high cognitive friction.
So by forcing yourself to do it every day, you are essentially normalizing the discomfort. You're making the act of speaking English as mundane and unthreatening as brushing your teeth.
Fundamentally, yes. You are desensitizing your nervous system to the pressure of performance.
All right, this is the perfect time to get deeply practical. We have established the neurological and physical reasons why these 10 minutes matter. Now, I want to dissect the routine itself, minute by minute.
Let's do it.
Because I know listeners are sitting there thinking, okay, I have my timer set for 10 minutes. What do I actually do? Let's break down minutes 1 to 4. The warm-up and pronunciation. What is physically and mentally happening in those first 120 seconds?
Minutes 1 and 2 are dedicated to a quick, low-stakes verbal warm-up. This is a crucial transitional phase. Jumping straight into a complex, timed academic prompt about university policies when you haven't spoken a single word of English all day is a recipe for a cognitive crash.
It is like a runner trying to sprint a 100-meter dash without stretching their hamstrings first. You aren't just going to perform poorly, you are actively going to pull a muscle.
A cognitive muscle, absolutely. So for the first 2 minutes, your only job is to describe something incredibly simple out loud.
Like what?
No timer, no pressure, no academic topics. You could look around and describe the room you are sitting in. My bedroom has a wooden desk near the window. The walls are light blue. There's a bookshelf on the left with a red coffee mug on it.
Just narrating your surroundings.
Exactly. Or you could narrate your morning routine. I woke up at 7, hit the snooze button twice, finally got up, made black coffee, and checked the weather on my phone. Or simply outline your mundane plans for the week. The actual topic is entirely irrelevant.
If the topic does not matter at all, what is the underlying mechanism at work here? What is the brain actually doing while I talk about my coffee mug?
You are waking up the English-speaking centers of your brain. You are redirecting blood flow to the language processing regions. You are getting the physical apparatus of your mouth, the jaw, the tongue, the lips moving and primed.
So it's basically stretching.
Yes. Most importantly, you are shifting psychological gears from your native language into your target language. But there is one absolutely non-negotiable rule for these first 2 minutes, and it is the hardest rule for students to follow.
What is it? Let me guess. No pausing.
Close. You must not stop to correct your mistakes.
Okay, wait. We need to unpack this. Is it really okay to just let glaring mistakes slide?
During the warm-up, yes.
If I am describing my morning and I say, he go to the store, instead of he goes, and I immediately recognize it is wrong, shouldn't I fix it? Aren't we always taught that practice makes permanent? So if we practice errors, we will permanently bake them into our brains?
In a grammar workbook setting, perhaps. But the warm-up is about fluency, rhythm, and forward momentum, not grammatical perfection. There is a concept in linguistics regarding the monitor.
The monitor.
Yes, the monitor is your internal editor, that little voice in your head that scans everything you say for errors before and during speech. While a highly calibrated monitor is necessary for writing an academic essay, an overactive monitor is the absolute enemy of spoken fluency.
Because it creates a bottleneck.
Step by step, it halts production. When you stop mid-sentence to correct a verb tense, you activate that monitoring part of your brain. This disrupts your rhythm and causes those painful stuttering pauses.
I do that all the time. I'll stop and say, wait, no, I meant to say, and then the whole sentence falls apart.
During minutes 1 and 2, we are aggressively training your brain to prioritize flow over accuracy. We are teaching your nervous system to push through imperfections without triggering a panic response. You are learning that a mistake is not fatal.
I see. You are basically telling your inner critic, your internal grammar police, to take a coffee break for 2 minutes. You are allowed to sound a bit clumsy as long as you keep moving forward.
That is a wonderful way to conceptualize it. Once your mouth is moving and your inner critic is quieted down, we transition to minutes 3 and 4. These 2 minutes focus strictly on pronunciation practice.
Let's dive deep into pronunciation, because I know this is a massive source of insecurity for test takers. People have this preconceived notion that if they don't sound like a polished news anchor broadcasting from London or New York, the raters are going to penalize them heavily.
Let us definitively dispel that myth right now. The raters evaluating your TOEFL responses do not care if you have a perfect native-sounding accent. In fact, accent reduction is not the goal.
Okay, so what are they looking for?
What they are strictly listening for is clear, intelligible speech. They want speech that does not require the listener to strain, squint, or expend extra cognitive effort to decode what you are trying to say. And intelligibility hinges heavily on 2 specific vocal mechanics: stress patterns and intonation.
Stress patterns always trip people up because English is notoriously inconsistent. We can completely change the syntactic function of a word just by pushing a little harder on a different syllable.
English is a stress-timed language, meaning the rhythm is dictated by which syllables are emphasized. The classic example we use is the word present.
Right.
If you stress the first syllable present, it functions as a noun, meaning a gift. But if you shift the power to the second syllable present, it becomes a verb, meaning to display or show something.
That one shift changes the entire meaning.
In an academic testing context, this shifting stress happens continuously with word families. Take the root word for taking a picture. Say these out loud with me and notice where the vocal power goes. First, the base noun. photograph. The stress lands heavily on the first syllable.
photograph. Got it. The first part is loud and clear.
Now, change it to the academic study or practice of taking pictures. Photography. The stress shifted entirely to the second syllable.
Photography. Right, and the O sound in the first syllable almost disappears. It becomes a weak sound.
And finally, the adjective form. Photographic-ishik. The stress moves all the way to the third syllable. This shifting stress is one of the most frequently utilized underlying patterns in academic English.
Wow, that shifts across 3 different syllables for the same root concept.
If you are discussing an art class and you stress photography as photography, the reader will understand you eventually, but it momentarily disrupts their comprehension. It forces them to stop, translate your pronunciation error into the correct word, and then catch up to your next sentence.
It makes your speech measurably less clear.
It creates a micro stumble for the listener.
So how do we actively practice fixing these stress patterns in just 2 minutes? Reading a list of words seems incredibly dry.
It is dry, and it's ineffective. Instead, you practice this by doing an exercise called shadowing.
Shadowing. What does that involve?
You find a short, high-quality, 30-second clip of spoken English. This could be a snippet of a podcast, a TED Talk, or an articulate news segment. You listen to it once just to grasp the general meaning and feel the speaker's energy. Then you play it again, and you speak out loud along with the speaker at the exact same time. You become their vocal shadow.
You're literally talking over them, trying to match their voice.
Specifically, you are attempting to perfectly match their rhythm. You pay attention to where they speed up, where they intentionally slow down for emphasis, which specific words in a sentence they hit the hardest, and their intonation.
So it's about the melody of the speech.
Exactly. Notice if their voice rises at the end of a question, indicating inquiry, or if it falls heavily at the end of a definitive statement, indicating authority. Shadowing forces your mouth to adopt the physical rhythm of natural English in real time. It is infinitely more effective than reading sterile pronunciation drills out of a textbook.
Because you are bypassing the analytical, rule-obsessed part of your brain and just relying on raw human mimicry. We are wired to mimic. That makes so much sense.
It's how we learned our first language, after all.
Right. Okay, so we are 4 minutes into our 10-minute routine. We have stretched our cognitive muscles. We are warmed up. Our inner critic is muted, and our mouth is physically moving to the correct rhythm of the language. Now we hit the heavy lifting. Section 4 on our agenda, but let's just flow right into it. Minutes 5 to 8. These are the core tasks. How do we simulate the pressure cooker?
This is where we replicate the actual demands of the test. Minutes 5 and 6 are dedicated to the independent speaking task.
The one everyone dreads.
This is the portion where you are asked a question about a personal preference or societal opinion, and you are given that brutal 15-second preparation window, followed immediately by 45 seconds of mandatory speaking.
The dreaded 15 seconds. I really want to dissect this. What should you actually be doing during that tiny sliver of time? Because, as we discussed with Amir earlier, staring at the clock in absolute panic is usually the default option.
To combat that default panic, you need a highly reliable structure. You need an architectural framework that you rely on so heavily, so instinctively, that you don't even have to use brain power to think about it.
A plug-and-play system.
Methodically, yes. For independent tasks, we strongly recommend internalizing the PREP template. PREP.
I call this a life raft for a freezing brain. When you were drowning in the test, you just grab onto the PRB framework. Let's break down what those letters stand for.
It stands for point, reason, example, point. During your 15 seconds of prep, you are absolutely not trying to write out full sentences. You are simply assigning 1 or 2 shorthand words to each of those 4 letters on your scratch paper.
Just single words.
Yes. First, P point. State your main opinion clearly and directly. Second, R reason. Give the single primary reason why you hold that opinion. Third, E, example. Provide a specific, concrete scenario or story that vividly illustrates your reason. And finally, the last P point. Briefly restate your initial opinion to wrap the argument up with a neat bow.
Let's do a deep dive into a sample response using this framework so you can hear exactly how it maps out in real time. Let's say the prompt you get on test day is, some students prefer to study in a completely quiet library. Others prefer to study in environments with background music or noise, like a cafe. Which do you prefer and why?
Perfect scenario. So the prompt ends and your 15-second start. You make a snap decision, quiet library. That is your point.
Got it.
Why? Because it allows for better concentration. That is your reason. What is a specific example? Think of a tough subject, a chemistry exam. So on your paper, you scribble 3 words: quiet, focus, chem exam. That takes maybe 8 seconds.
You even have time to take a deep breath.
Exactly. Take a deep breath, the 45-second timer starts, and you begin to speak.
And using the framework, the opening would sound something like this.
Personally, I strongly prefer to study in a quiet environment, such as a university library. That covers the first P, the point.
That is the mechanism at work, clear and direct. Then you move smoothly into the R, the reason. My primary reason for this preference is that complete silence helps me concentrate much more deeply on complex, demanding material. Whenever I have tried studying with music or cafe noise, I found my attention was constantly divided.
Then we hit the E, the crucial part, the example. For instance, last semester I was preparing for an incredibly difficult final chemistry exam. I initially tried studying in a crowded coffee shop, but I couldn't focus. I found that moving to the silent floor of the library dramatically increased how much technical information I could retain.
And then, with 5 seconds left on the clock, you stick the landing with the final P, the closing point. For these reasons, I find studying in silence to be far more effective.
That feels so incredibly structured. That response, delivered with moderate pacing and confidence, hits every single requirement the raters are looking for. It is highly coherent, it flows logically from one idea to the next without meandering, and the specific example provides necessary depth.
It is brilliant because the framework acts as a rigid container. You pour your unique vocabulary and ideas into the container, but you never have to worry about the shape of the argument. It is already pre-built for you. You never get lost in the middle of a sentence wondering where you are going next.
That is the perfect way to conceptualize it. You are offloading the immense burden of organization. By relying heavily on P-pre, your brain does not have to spend precious energy deciding what to say next. It can devote all of its available cognitive resources to how to say it.
Which means better vocabulary and fewer pauses.
Yes, it allows your brain to search for higher-level vocabulary and maintain clear, rhythmic pronunciation.
So that covers minutes 5 and 6, the independent task. What happens when we move to minutes 7 and 8?
Minutes 7 and 8 are designed to simulate the integrated speaking tasks. These are notoriously difficult because they require intense cognitive multitasking.
Because you're taking in information from multiple sources, right?
Yes. You have to read a short passage, listen to an audio clip of a lecture or conversation, synthesize those two competing or complementary streams of information, and then summarize them out loud coherently.
Which feels nearly impossible to practice on your own unless you have expensive, specialized TOEFL software generating prompts for you.
It does feel that way, but you can simulate the cognitive load perfectly with what we call the mini-task method. You don't need test software.
How does the mini-task method work?
Find a short paragraph on an academic topic, a science blog, an economics article, just 3 to 5 sentences. Read it. Then find a short audio clip or read a brief transcript that adds a new dimension to or contrasts with that topic. Take 30 seconds to organize your notes, and then force yourself to speak for 60 seconds, summarizing how the two pieces of information interact.
Let's talk about that 30-second note-taking phase, because this is a massive trap. I have seen students in panic mode try to transcribe everything the speaker is saying word for word as if they are a court stenographer.
It's a natural urge, but a disastrous one.
Their hand is cramping, they are scribbling frantically. How do we stop ourselves from falling into the trap of writing full sentences?
Attempting to write full sentences will completely destroy your integrated response. It is a fatal error. When you are focused on writing out the words, the professor believes that.
Oh.
You are not actively listening to the next critical point the speaker is making.
Your brain can't write and listen at full capacity simultaneously.
Your auditory processing shuts down. You fall behind, you realize you missed a key detail, panic sets in, and your notes become a jumbled, useless mess. You must train yourself to use shorthand, visual symbols, and extreme abbreviations.
Give me a highly specific example of what good, functional shorthand looks like under pressure.
Let's say the academic topic is about universities shifting toward hybrid learning models, a mix of in-person and online classes. The reading passage argues that this model offers immense flexibility for students. But the audio lecture counters that by stating it significantly lowers the quality of peer-to-peer interaction.
Okay, so the standard student instinct would be to write. The hybrid model gives students flexibility, but it lowers peer interaction.
Right, and your notes should absolutely not say that.
Because that is way too many words. It takes 10 seconds just to write that down.
You would write, Hypnodal equals flex plus down arrow peer interaction.
Ah, using a physical, drawn, downward-pointing arrow instead of trying to spell out the word decreases or lowers.
Yes. Symbols process exponentially faster visually when your brain is under the duress of a timer. During your 60 seconds of speaking, you look down at your scratch paper. You see Hybot model. You see the plus sign next to flex. You see the down arrow next to peer interaction. And your brain instantly, effortlessly translates those visual cues back into fluid English sentences.
That's incredibly efficient.
The notes are merely triggers for your short-term memory. They are not a script to read from verbatim.
We are offloading the organization again, freeing up the cognitive resources. I love this running theme. We are constantly trying to make the brain's job as easy as possible by giving it shortcuts. Okay, so we have survived the core tasks. We are 8 minutes into the routine. Our heart rate is probably up. We are sweating a little bit. We are at the final stretch, minutes 9 to 10. You refer to this phase as the secret weapon. Why is it a secret weapon?
I call it that because the actual tangible growth in your language ability does not happen while you are speaking. The growth happens in the quiet moments immediately after you finish speaking.
Oh, that's interesting.
Minutes 9 and 10 are strictly dedicated to self-evaluation. And frankly, this is the most undervalued, frequently skipped part of any practice routine. Most students finish their 60-second response, breathe a massive sigh of relief, close their books, and walk away to get a snack. That is a colossal missed opportunity for improvement.
Because they are leaving all the valuable data on the table. They survived the exercise, but they didn't learn anything from it.
Categorically. If you do not intentionally pause to evaluate what just happened in the last minute, you are relying on vague emotional feelings to guide your long-term improvement. You walk away thinking, well, that was terrible, I sounded stupid, or maybe, I guess that was okay.
Vague feelings aren't a great roadmap.
Vague feelings do not lead to specific, measurable improvements. You need a highly structured, analytical way to score yourself.
We use a 1 to 4 scale for this, right?
Yeah.
Let's walk through the 5 specific categories listeners should be grading themselves on during minute 9.
You are going to brutally, but fairly, rate yourself from a 1 meaning it needs significant, targeted work to a 4 meaning it was excellent and test-ready across 5 distinct areas.
Okay, what's area number 1?
Number 1 is fluency. Did you speak smoothly? Did you maintain a relatively consistent pace? Or were there agonizingly long, jarring pauses where you lost your train of thought?
Makes sense. Number 2.
Number 2 is pronunciation. Was your speech clear? Did you utilize natural intonation, dropping your pitch at the end of statements, or did you sound flat and robotic?
Which goes back to the shadowing we practiced in minutes 3 and 4.
Exactly. Number 3 is vocabulary. Did you utilize a broad variety of words, or did you rely on basic adjectives, saying good and bad 6 times in 60 seconds? Did you manage to include any high-level, topic-specific terminology?
That vocabulary check is a big one. It's so easy to fall back on basic words when you're stressed. What about the last 2 categories?
Number 4 is grammar. Were your sentences structurally sound? Did you attempt to construct complex compound sentences, or did you play it entirely safe, sticking only to very basic subject-verb-object patterns that lack academic sophistication?
So pushing yourself structurally. And number 5.
And finally, number 5 is organization. Did you establish a clear main point immediately? Did you utilize transition words like furthermore, conversely, or, for instance, to connect your ideas logically and guide the listener through your argument?
Okay, I am going to play devil's advocate here because this requires an immense amount of self-awareness. Are we actually objective enough to grade our own speaking accurately? Won't most stressed out students just give themselves terrible scores, straight 1s and 2s across the board out of sheer insecurity and imposter syndrome?
That is a highly valid concern. The perfectionism trap is very real, and we tend to be our own harshest critics. But the primary goal here is not perfect, objective, rater-level grading.
And what is the goal of the scoring?
The goal is cognitive reframing. It is about breaking that overwhelming, paralyzing, vague feeling of, I did badly, into specific, actionable data points. Even if a student is overly critical and grades themselves too harshly, the physical act of assigning a number forces a neurological shift.
How so?
It moves the brain's activity away from the emotional, panicked center, the amygdala, and forces it into the logical, analytical center, the prefrontal cortex.
Oh, that makes perfect sense. It takes the emotional sting out of the failure. It transforms a perceived personal flaw into a mechanical puzzle to solve.
accurately stated. And here is the true secret weapon aspect of this entire 10-minute process. After you assign your scores across those 5 categories, you absolutely do not try to fix everything at once.
Really? You don't try to get 4s across the board the next day?
No, that is impossible and overwhelming. You look at your scores, you identify the single lowest scoring category, and you make that your solitary, obsessive focus for tomorrow's practice session.
So to clarify, if I gave myself a 2 in vocabulary because I couldn't think of any good words, but I scored a 3 in fluency, grammar, and pronunciation, I essentially ignore the grammar and the organization during tomorrow's 10 minutes. I just focus entirely on injecting 2 or 3 better words into my response.
Yes. Targeted, logical, isolated improvement is infinitely more effective than waking up and vaguely trying to be better at speaking English today. By choosing one micro goal for tomorrow, you give your brain a manageable, achievable task. It lowers the barrier to entry.
This transitions beautifully into the next phase of our discussion. As listeners apply this daily 10-minute routine, they are inevitably going to hit roadblocks. It won't be smooth sailing. Let's navigate some of the most common pitfalls you see test takers fall into. Starting with mistake number 1, speaking too fast. Why is speed such a dangerous trap?
Because modern society broadly equates rapid speech with high fluency. We have this misconception that if we can speak English at 100 miles an hour, the rater will instantly assume we are highly proficient natives.
Right, like if I talk fast, I must know what I'm doing.
But under the intense physiological stress of an exam, speed actively destroys clarity. When you speak too fast, you literally do not give your articulators, your tongue, your lips, your teeth, your palate, enough physical time to form the complex phonetic sounds properly. Words begin to bleed into one another, hard consonants disappear into mush, and the rater is left straining to decipher a garbled wall of sound.
I always relate this to driving a manual transmission car. If you are redlining the engine, pushing the car to its absolute maximum speed of 120 miles per hour, you have 0 reaction time.
That's a very accurate comparison.
If a deer jumps out into the road or there's a slight bump, you can't swerve. A tiny obstacle causes a catastrophic flaming crash. In speaking, if you are talking at maximum speed, the moment you inevitably forget a single word, your brain crashes. You stutter, you panic, because you have left yourself 0 buffer time to search your memory for a replacement word.
That analogy perfectly captures the danger. The fix for this is incredibly simple in theory, but requires immense discipline to execute under pressure. You must consciously, force yourself to speak at roughly 80% of your maximum perceived speed.
80%. I have to say, when you actually force yourself to do that, it feels uncomfortably slow. It feels like you are dragging the words out and sounding unintelligent.
It feels agonizingly slow internally to you because your adrenaline is pumping. But you must trust the process. To the external listener, to the rater, 80% speed does not sound slow. It sounds measured.
It sounds intentional.
Exactly. It sounds authoritative, thoughtful, and confident. Crucially, it gives your brain those essential milliseconds it needs to look ahead, plan the grammatical structure of the next clause, and retrieve vocabulary, completely preventing those jarring deer-in-the-headlights pauses.
It is about building in a safety buffer. Okay, mistake number 2. Memorize answers. I completely understand the temptation here. If I am terrified of the timer and I know I might freeze, why not just write and memorize a perfect, complex paragraph about the impact of technology and then forcefully shoehorn it into whatever prompt they give me?
It is a very logical survival tactic. It is a defense mechanism against anxiety, but it fails spectacularly in practice. You have to remember, TOEFL raters are highly trained, seasoned professionals. They listen to thousands upon thousands of spoken responses.
They can spot a script.
They can spot a prepackaged, memorized answer within 3 seconds of you opening your mouth.
What is the undeniable tell that gives a student away?
The pacing is the biggest glaring giveaway. Natural, spontaneous human speech is dynamic. It has bursts of rapid delivery followed by thoughtful micro-pauses as the brain searches for a word. It has natural cadence.
And memorized speech doesn't have that.
No, memorized speech sounds like a metronome. It is flat, robotic, and strangely rhythmic. It lacks the natural melody of thought. Furthermore, the vocabulary level usually shifts dramatically and unnaturally.
What do you mean by that?
Well, a student might stumble through the opening warm-up using very basic, flawed grammar, and then suddenly, seamlessly launch into a hyper-complex, flawlessly rehearsed monologue about socioeconomic paradigms. And worse, that memorized chunk rarely aligns perfectly with the specific nuance of the question being asked.
It sounds like two different people are taking the test. So the fix is to memorize the framework, like the PRP template, but never the actual script.
Methodically stated. Memorize the skeleton of the argument, but always force your brain to generate the flesh and blood in real time.
Let's discuss mistake number 3, poor organization. We touched on this briefly with a wandering response, but let's dig into the mechanics of why students get lost.
This is the student who hears the beep and just starts talking without any conceptual map of where they are going. They provide a point, they start an example. Halfway through, they realize the example contradicts their point. They panic, pivot to a completely new point, and then the timer aggressively cuts them off mid-sentence,
Leaving the listener totally confused.
Right. The fix is what we call the one-word anchor. During your 15 seconds of prep time, write down one core thematic word that represents the absolute heart of your argument.
Give me a concrete example of an anchor word.
If your prompt asks whether you prefer online learning or traditional classroom learning, and your chosen anchor word is interaction, write that in big letters. As you speak, every single sentence must logically tie back to how interaction is affected. Classrooms are better because of interaction. For example, group projects force interaction. Online classes isolate students, reducing interaction.
It acts as a compass.
Yes. If you start talking about the cost of textbooks, you look at your paper, see interaction, and immediately course correct. It keeps you from wandering into the weeds.
It tethers you to the main idea. Let's tackle mistake number 4, long pauses. We are talking about freezing in absolute silence for 3 to 5 seconds. I really want to understand the psychology here. Why do we feel this desperate, overwhelming need to find the singular, perfect vocabulary word mid-sentence to the point where we would rather say absolutely nothing at all?
This is the perfectionism trap manifesting in real time under pressure. You are building a complex sentence and you want to use a high-level academic word to impress the rater, say the word exacerbate. But your brain panics under the timer and you can't retrieve it.
So you just freeze.
Instead of just pivoting and using a simpler, perfectly acceptable word like worsen, you freeze. You hold your breath, staring into space, desperately hoping the perfect word will magically appear in your consciousness.
And the silence just stretches out and it feels agonizing, and the rater's sitting there wondering if your microphone disconnected.
And that dead silence severely, irreparably damages your fluency score. A simple word, delivered confidently and without hesitation, will always, invariably, score higher than a highly advanced SAT-level word delivered after a painful 5-second silence. Fluency is prioritized over complexity when complexity causes a crash.
So what is the tactical fix? What do I actually do with my mouth when I realize I am stuck and the word isn't coming?
You need to pre-build a toolkit of transition and filler phrases. I do not mean saying or I mean structured, natural-sounding phrases that buy your brain time while sounding fluent. Phrases like, what I mean by that is, or let me put it this way, or to illustrate this point more clearly.
Oh, that's clever.
When you deploy these phrases, you keep the physical rhythm of English flowing. You sound in control while secretly giving your brain a 2-second window to abandon the search for exacerbate and pivot to a simpler vocabulary word.
That is incredibly practical. Just like verbal sleight of hand. Okay, mistake number 5, repeating words. This is when someone uses the word important or good 5 times in 45 seconds.
Repeatedly relying on the same basic adjectives signals a very limited, shallow vocabulary pool to the rater. If every concept in your argument is important, good, or bad, your argument lacks academic nuance.
So how do you fix it without panicking?
The fix is active, deliberate synonym building. During your self-evaluation phase, if you notice you overuse the word important, you must deliberately train yourself the next day to deploy words like crucial, essential, vital, or highly beneficial. You have to force variety.
And mistake number 6, weak examples. This is when someone says, I prefer studying alone because it helps me focus, and then they just stop. They think they've answered the question.
They stated the reason, but they failed to illustrate it. A reason is an abstract concept. An example is the narrative that grounds that concept in reality. Providing a detailed example proves to the rater that you possess the grammatical stamina to sustain a narrative in English for more than one sentence.
But here's the common panic point. What if I genuinely don't have a personal example? What if the prompt asks about a university policy regarding parking and I don't own a car, or I've never experienced that specific scenario? Do I just say, I don't know?
This is a massive, liberating secret about the speaking test. The raters do not care if your example is a true autobiographical story. They are not private investigators fact-checking your life.
Wait, really? You can just lie.
That they are evaluating your language, not your honesty. If you don't have a personal anecdote readily available, fabricate a hypothetical one. Start your sentence with the phrase, imagine a student who, or consider a hypothetical scenario where. Creating a hypothetical situation demonstrates complex grammatical control, often requiring conditional tenses, and fulfills the rubric's requirement for a specific example just as effectively as a true story.
Imagine a student who, I love that phrase, it is an instant story generator. It gives you permission to make things up on the fly. Okay, moving into the next phase, accelerating fluency and vocabulary expansion. So we've established how to stop the bleeding by avoiding those 6 mistakes. But defense doesn't win the game on its own. How do we play offense?
Exactly, we need to push forward.
Once someone masters this 10-minute baseline and isn't panicking anymore, how do they actively push their spoken English to the next level outside of those 10 minutes? What are the techniques they can sprinkle throughout their day?
Once the 10-minute routine is a firmly established habit and the panic subsides, you can accelerate your progress with several higher-level techniques. The first is advanced shadowing. We discussed shadowing earlier, using basic, slow audio clips to find the rhythm. But to truly push your fluency boundaries, you need to shadow much more complex, dense material.
What kind of material are we talking about?
Academic TED Talks, fast-paced panel discussions, or rigorous academic debates. You want content where the speakers are highly passionate, speaking quickly, and utilizing advanced multi-clause phrasing. By attempting to shadow them, you force your brain and your articulators to process and produce English at native argumentative speeds. It builds immense vocal stamina.
That sounds intense, like training with weighted clothing.
Yeah.
What about paraphrasing practice? How does that work casually?
Paraphrasing is an absolutely crucial skill, especially for the integrated tasks where you cannot simply parrot back the exact words the reading passage used. You have to synthesize and rephrase it to prove comprehension. You can practice this anytime, anywhere.
Just in daily life.
Yes. Take a single sentence from a news article you read that morning. For example, the university administration decided to expand its library facilities to accommodate the growing number of incoming students. Then, as you are walking to class or washing dishes, force yourself to say that exact same core idea 3 entirely different ways, out loud.
Okay, let me try. Version 1. The school is building a bigger library because enrollment went up. Or a more formal version 2. Due to a rapidly growing student body, the campus library is undergoing a major expansion.
That is perfectly executed. You are actively training your brain to realize that there is never only one rigid way to express an idea. If you get stuck on a specific vocabulary word during the actual test, this paraphrasing skill allows your brain to instantly pivot and build a completely different sentence structure to convey the same underlying meaning without pausing.
Another technique you recommend is the storytelling practice, narrating a daily event in 60 seconds. Why storytelling?
Human beings are fundamentally neurologically wired for narrative. We process information best through stories. The most compelling, highly scored speaking responses are essentially structured mini-stories. They have a clear context, a conflict or point of friction, and a resolution.
I can see how that helps structure an answer.
You can train this narrative instinct daily. Take a completely mundane event, like getting caught in a sudden rainstorm on your way to the grocery store, and force yourself to tell it as a structured, engaging story in exactly 60 seconds. It builds the habit of organizing information narratively and keeping the listener engaged.
And the 5-minute daily speaking journal ties directly into the stamina building as well, right?
It does. A speaking journal is low pressure, entirely spontaneous speech. You open a voice memo app on your phone and you just talk about your day, your frustrations, your goals entirely in English for 5 unbroken minutes. No timer, no prompt. It builds pure vocal stamina and comfort with your own voice.
But there is an incredibly uncomfortable truth woven into all of these techniques, especially the journal, and it involves those voice recordings. The strong advice is that you absolutely must record your smartphone voice memos, and then you must listen back to them to hear your actual pacing and pauses. Now, listening to your own recorded voice is a universally painful experience. I cringe viscerally when I have to listen to my own audio edits for these deep dives. Why do we universally hate hearing ourselves, and why is enduring that pain absolutely mandatory for improvement?
The scientific reason we despise hearing our own voices is a phenomenon called bone conduction.
Bone conduction.
Yes. When you speak, you hear your voice in 2 different ways simultaneously. You hear the sound waves traveling through the air and entering your ear canal, but you also hear the internal physical vibrations of your vocal cords traveling directly through the bones of your skull and jaw to your inner ear.
So it's vibrating inside your head.
Right. This internal bone conduction boosts the lower frequencies. It makes your voice sound deeper, richer, and more resonant inside your own head. When you listen to a digital recording, you are stripped of that bone conduction. You only hear the air-conducted sound.
Which explains why it sounds so thin and weird.
It sounds thin, nasal, unfamiliar, and usually much higher pitched. Neurologically, it feels like listening to an imposter's voice.
It is deeply, fundamentally unsettling. It triggers an identity crisis every time.
It truly does. But you must overcome that deep psychological discomfort because the rich, fluent voice in your head is deceiving you. In your head, you sound fluent. In your head, those pauses while you searched for a word didn't feel that long. In your head, your pronunciation of the fen felt accurate.
The recording doesn't lie.
The recording is the cold, unvarnished, objective truth. You have to hear what the rater actually hears in order to objectively judge your 1 to 4 scale during the self-evaluation phase. It is the only reliable way to catch your repetitive crutch words, or to realize that a pause you thought was 1 second was actually 4 seconds long.
So you just have to face the cringe, is the only path forward. Let's shift to the final piece of acceleration. Vocabulary building blocks. The mandate here is precision over broadness. What does that mean?
If you want to jump from a merely good score to an excellent top-tier score, you need thematic academic vocabulary. The TOEFL, by its design, repeatedly touches on a specific rotation of themes: education, technology, the environment, health, and social issues. Utilizing precise, high-level words within these specific themes acts as a massive psychological shortcut to a higher score.
It shows you know the field.
Yes. When a rater hears a precise academic term used correctly, it instantly signals to them that you possess advanced linguistic control, elevating their perception of your entire response.
Let's actually go through some of these specific thematic words because listeners love concrete examples. Let's start with education.
A phenomenal, highly versatile word for education prompts is pedagogy. It refers to the specific method, theory, and practice of teaching. Instead of saying a basic sentence like, "The teacher's style was good and helped students learn," you display precision. The professor's pedagogy was highly interactive, which fostered better retention.
It is precise, it is academically elevated, and it instantly commands respect.
Another critical term in education is academic integrity, the ethical code of academia, involving the avoidance of cheating or plagiarism.
Universities must strictly enforce academic integrity to maintain their reputation. That sounds so much more authoritative and mature than saying schools shouldn't let kids cheat. What about the technology theme?
Automation is a critical, frequently tested concept. Instead of saying, machines and robots are doing all the human work now, you discuss the broader socioeconomic impacts of automation on the modern workforce. Another vital term is digital literacy, the ability to effectively navigate, evaluate, and communicate information online. In the 21st century, digital literacy is a fundamental requirement for student success.
Moving to the environment. This feels like a guaranteed topic on almost every test.
It is ubiquitous. Instead of using a clunky phrase like keeping nature safe from humans, use the concept of sustainability. The City Council must prioritize urban sustainability. And instead of saying there are lots of different animals and plants in the forest, use the precise term biodiversity. Protecting the Amazon rainforest is absolutely essential for maintaining global biodiversity.
What about for the health theme?
Preventive care is incredibly useful. Instead of saying going to the doctor before you actually get sick so you don't get worse, which takes over a dozen words and sounds conversational, you condense that entire complex concept into 2 precise words. Governments should heavily invest in preventive care to significantly reduce long-term healthcare costs.
I see what you mean. The advanced vocabulary literally makes your speaking more efficient. It saves you precious seconds on the timer because one precise word does the heavy lifting of a 10-word descriptive sentence.
That is specifically the strategic advantage. And finally, let's look at social issues. Socioeconomic inequality is a highly powerful, sophisticated phrase for discussing the gap between different wealth classes. And civic engagement, which refers to participating in your community and democracy. High schools should actively encourage civic engagement among youth.
Just slipping one of those in makes a huge difference.
If you deploy just one or two of these precision words appropriately during a 45-second response, it dramatically, instantly elevates the perceived intellectual quality of your argument in the rater's mind.
I love how actionable those terms are. Listeners can write those down right now. Okay, we're arriving at the final and perhaps most crucial piece of this puzzle, the mindset of success. Because all of these frameworks, the PRAP template, the shorthand math notes, the advanced pedagogy vocabulary, they're entirely useless if you get demoralized and give up on day 3.
Consistency is everything.
We have to look at the deep psychological resilience required to stick with this daily habit. Let's look at some real student journeys to ground this theory in reality. I'm curious what this looks like in practice because theory is easy. Have you seen someone actually implement this who was completely paralyzed by their own voice recording?
Absolutely. Mayolin's story is a profound testament to pushing through the intense discomfort of self-evaluation. She was perpetually stuck at a speaking score of 18. Her written English was grammatically solid, but when speaking, her responses meandered aimlessly, and she repeated basic words constantly because of nerves.
Her monitor was probably working overtime.
Yes, and when she finally committed to the daily 10-minute routine, her absolute biggest hurdle was the voice recordings. She visibly, physically cringed when listening to herself through her phone speaker.
She faced the harsh reality of bone conduction.
She did, and the recordings revealed a hard truth. She realized she was starting every sentence with, "I think," and describing everything as good. But instead of quitting out of embarrassment, she utilized that cringe as data.
She used it to map her next steps.
Right. She forced herself to implement the PRP structure until it was instinctive, stopping her from wandering. She actively integrated advanced words like advantageous and significant to replace good. By recording daily, she objectively identified her weaknesses and methodically patched them one day at a time. She eventually raised her score from an 18 to a 26.
That is a life-changing score jump. That is the difference between rejection letters and university acceptance letters achieved just by facing the cringe. What about the physical anxiety aspect? Have you seen someone overcome the literal biological panic we discussed earlier?
Yes. Hassan's story is a perfect example of overcoming debilitating, paralyzing anxiety. He scored a 17 on his first practice test simply because his mind would go completely blank when the digital timer started counting down. His breakthrough wasn't discovering a new grammar rule, it was employing psychological exposure therapy.
Expand on that concept of exposure therapy. We usually hear about that in the context of treating severe phobias, like a fear of spiders or a fear of heights, where a therapist slowly introduces the terrifying thing until the patient's nervous system realizes they aren't going to die. How did Hassan apply that to a language test?
It is the exact same psychological principle. He couldn't handle the visual threat of the timer at first. It triggered his fight or flight response. So he began his 10-minute routine by running the timer on his phone, but turning his phone face down on the desk so he couldn't see the numbers.
Oh, wow. He just hit it.
He just knew the clock was ticking in the background. After a week of surviving that, he turned the phone face up, but placed it across the room on a bookshelf. He could glance at it, but it wasn't dominating his immediate field of vision. Gradually, over several weeks, he moved the phone closer and closer until it was fully visible right next to his notes.
He systematically acclimatized his nervous system to the presence of the threat, proving to his amygdala that the timer couldn't physically harm him.
Methodically, yes. He actively shifted his emotional state from absolute paralyzing terror to what he called manageable discomfort. And by managing the physiological response, his natural, fluent English abilities were finally able to shine through. He ended up scoring a 24.
And finally, let's talk about Priya. She is the vocabulary champion of these case studies.
Priya was highly communicative and outgoing, but her speech lacked academic precision. She sounded like she was chatting at a bus stop, not taking a university entrance exam. She dedicated her focus specifically to the thematic vocabulary building blocks we discussed.
How did she integrate them?
Before her 10-minute routine, she would spend just 3 minutes reviewing 3 highly specific thematic words like sustainability or pedagogy. Her personal rule was that she had to creatively use at least one of those specific words naturally during her independent speaking response that day.
Just one word a day.
That's all it takes. Over 60 days of this deliberate practice, she built an active, readily available vocabulary of over 180 topic-specific academic words. She raised her score from a 20 to a 27.
These stories highlight something vital that we need to emphasize: consistency over perfection. You said earlier, and I wrote this down, treat every mistake as a map, not a tragedy. Can you elaborate on the psychology of that phrase? Because, let's be honest, it deeply feels like a personal tragedy when you stumble and sound foolish in another language.
It feels like a tragedy because our traditional educational systems condition us from childhood to view errors as moral failures that require punishment or bad grades. But perfectionism is the absolute, undeniable enemy of language acquisition. Perfect native speakers do not score perfectly on every single rubric every time they open their mouths.
We use fillers and make mistakes constantly.
We use filler words, we restart sentences, we stumble. The raters are not seeking flawless programmed androids. They are seeking effective, understandable human communicators.
So how do we actively shift our brain from feeling the tragedy to reading the map?
By analyzing the stumble objectively, devoid of emotion. When you freeze during practice and forget a word, the tragedy mindset says, I am terrible at this, I am stupid, I will never pass this test. The map mindset steps back and says, fascinating data point. I lack the precise vocabulary to describe a hybrid work model just now. I now know specifically what I need to study tomorrow during my self-evaluation phase.
That's incredibly powerful.
Mistakes are simply neutral data points. They are directional markers pointing you directly toward your next necessary area of growth.
That mindset shift is huge, and it ties directly into psychologist Carol Dweck's famous concept of the growth mindset versus the fixed mindset.
It is the foundational pillar of everything we have discussed. If you hold a fixed mindset, if you secretly believe your language ability is an innate genetic trait, that you either have the magical language gene or you don't, then every single mistake you make simply confirms your inherent, unchangeable inadequacy. You will inevitably quit.
But with a growth mindset.
But if you adopt a growth mindset, you understand that language ability is a structure that is built, not a gift you are born with. Every daily 10-minute practice session, however flawed or uncomfortable, is a brick placed in a wall. You are constructing the ability over time through deliberate, consistent effort.
That is an incredibly empowering perspective to end on. We are not defined by our starting point or anxiety or our stumbles, but by our commitment to the daily process of building that wall. We have covered an immense, staggering amount of ground in this deep dive. We unpack the physiological mental gymnastics and the fight or flight response triggered by the timer. We explored the neuroscience of habit formation, myelin sheaths, and pruning.
A lot of ground indeed.
We went through the minute-by-minute breakdown of the warm-up, the necessity of the PRP framework, and the vital importance of self-evaluation. We troubleshot the common mistakes like speed and long pauses, and we explored the deep psychology required to actually endure the process without quitting.
It is a highly comprehensive toolkit, but a toolkit is only valuable if you actually open it, take the tools out, and put them to work. The 10 minutes only function if they are executed daily.
And that brings us to the ultimate final point I want to leave you with today. The goal of all this relentless practice, the shadowing, the shorthand math notes, the bone conduction cringe of your own voice memos, the vocabulary drills, it isn't just about satisfying an invisible examiner's rubric or passing a rigid academic gatekeeper. Those are the immediate necessary metrics, sure. But the deeper lasting purpose is much more profound. It is about ensuring that your true personality, your specific brand of humor, the genuine depth of your intellect, and the complex nuances of your ideas aren't forever trapped behind a wall of linguistic hesitation. This daily 10-minute practice isn't about molding you into a perfect, sterilized, flawless English-speaking robot. It is about equipping you with the biological and structural fluency to set your authentic, brilliant self free in a completely new language. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this YouTube channel.